Good day, everyone. Welcome to another edition of FS 101. In this second part of the first lecture, we'll discuss why we do what we do by looking at the framework for the Sustainable Development Goals, from which we derive our common goal as food scientists and technologists towards developing a better world. So, in case you haven't tackled this in senior high, we have what we call the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which have targets that need to be met by participating countries by a certain year, usually around 2025 and 2030. So we have here a couple of them, such as no poverty, no hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, and the like. So some of these are more related to food, obviously, than the others. But nonetheless, we want to make it our common goal in the world to abide by these goals as we practice our profession. Bilang mga food scientists and technologists, ang pinakamalapit malamang sa ating puso na Sustainable Development Goal ay itong goal number 2, zero hunger. Unfortunately, in the world, 1 in 9 people are undernourished, and that number is even higher in developing countries such as ours. So this gives us the impetus to do our job, in a world where billionaires are racing towards space or towards Mars. We still haven't brought this number down to zero. So ang nakakalungkot yung priority ng mga billionaires sa mundo, no? Also, it's a reality that agriculture employs 2 out of every 5 people in the world today, and it's the largest source of income for poor rural households. Ironically, those who make our food are the ones who are hungry. That is such a sad state. Moreover, despite even being a woman comprising 2 out of 5 of the agricultural labor force and up to half in Asia and Africa, they sadly only own 20% of the land. So that means may gender inequality doon. And lastly, the cost of poor nutrition in terms of death is 3.1 million children dying every year. To give you a perspective, that's higher than the total global death toll of COVID-19 right now. No? So poor nutrition causes almost half of the deaths of children under 5. And that is a very sad reality. And we as food scientists and technologists play a big role to reduce all of these figures to a manageable one. As mentioned before, each Sustainable Development Goal has a target to be met by a certain year. In the case of zero hunger or no hunger, they plan to end hunger by 2030, ensure access to all people, in particular the poor and vulnerable, including the infants, 2, safe, nutritious, and sufficient food for all year round. So we'll discuss this a bit more when we discuss the concept of food security and what it actually means. Also, they want to end not just hunger but also all forms of malnutrition, including an earlier goal by 2025, which achieves internationally agreed targets on stunting and wasting in children under 5 years of age. And also, they want to address the nutritional needs of adolescent girls, pregnant and lactating women, and older persons. So we want to address all the needs of the marginalized people in terms of their food and nutritional intake. Especially as, for example, stunting and wasting is a very big problem even in our country, the Philippines, to date. Ending hunger is not just about having enough food, but the food must be available to people kayang bilhin or may access, which is part of the definition of food security. We'll discuss this one in subsequent lectures. We also want improved nutritional status, especially sa mga growing children from infancy, because this impacts their ability to perform physically, cognitively, etc. for the rest of their life. And also, sustainable development goal ito, so kailangan din ma-promote ang isang sustainable method of agriculture. In particular, in terms of agri, we want to focus on increasing or doubling the agricultural productivity, specifically of the small-scale producers, focusing on women, indigenous people, family farmers, pastoralists, and fisher folk. So ito yung tinatawag natin ng mga highly marginalized sectors. Sila yung pinaka mahirap among doon sa mga mahihirap na mga farmers. And ways to achieve these include granting equal access to land. So there are actually a lot of farmers who are just being paid wages because they either rent the land or they don't own the land and they're just being treated as employees. And others also need to increase their productivity through resource inputs and knowledge and financial services for farmers that could help them invest, grow their money, or protect their investments, such as in let's say crop insurances, na kahit bagyuhin ka ay meron kang makukuha, much in the same way that life insurance or medical insurances help us when we are in an uncertain predicament. Lastly, yung food science na makaka-help siya dito sa value addition na tinatawag natin, kung saan ang isang produkto, let's say rice, imbis na ibenta mo siya ng bigas lang, ipoprocess mo siya let's say to a processed product like kakanin or maybe a canned rice product, and you can sell it at a higher price. So kung ikaw yung farmer, extra income to sa'yo, and you prolong the shelf life of the product so that you can sell it even when meron kang ibang excuse me. So yeah, when you have a processed rice products, you get additional income from it as well, and you diversify what you can do. Hindi ka lang nakadepende dun sa farm mo, but also on processing your products as well. No, usually for small scale holders, these are in the form of cooperatives kung saan nagbubuklod-buklod yung mga farmers, and they have a facility they can use to process, and they of course reap the benefits of that sales ng cooperative nila, but they all have to work in part dun sa cooperative na yun. And also, lastly, we could increase the non-farm employment of the agricultural sector. Since hindi naman lahat sa production side, no? Also have logistics and the like. So zero hunger is not just about feeding the present, but also feeding the future. We may have enough food for our population now, but our population is continuously increasing, and we are also facing challenges like climate change, which affects the agricultural sector. So we need to look at sustainable food production systems in such a way that our inputs right now will not be depleted more than they can be replenished, so that our future generations will still have enough food. Okay? And because our population is increasing, we still need to increase the output of our production per unit land. And you want to maintain the ecosystem or help them recover. For example, if you do overfishing, there will come a time you will no longer be able to catch enough fish. Okay? So all of these are part of zero hunger, again, not just for the present, but also for the future. So the sustainable goal of no hunger does not just look at food and nutrition, but also the agricultural diversity requirements. Since we have a problem, let's say, with monoculture, wherein less and less crops are being used to feed the population. So we want to feed the population well and feed them with a diverse set of farm produce. And we also want to tackle the issue of justice in this case, wherein we want the equitable sharing of benefits from the utilization of resources. Meaning to say, hindi lang nakikinabang yung ilang mayayaman, pero pati mismo yung mga, let's say, farmers at the grassroots level doing the actual groundwork. Yung mayaman din sila, kasama ng pagyaman ng iba nilang mga partners in the food supply chain. So again, the goal of zero hunger does not just stop with meeting the ends, but also making sure we have the means to get there. And this includes increasing investment in our agricultural production, and also considering the international nature of food production and import and export, there should also be increase in international cooperation, and of course the infrastructure of our countryside or rural part of the nation, increasing agricultural research and extension services by government and non-government entities, as well as developing new technologies to increase plant and livestock productivity and establishing gene banks to enhance not just the productivity but the diversity as well of plant and livestock stocks, especially in least developed countries like ours. Now, of course, the agricultural disadvantages that the Philippines have over other so-called agricultural countries is another issue that we will not be discussing. So it's next to impossible to talk about agriculture, import-export without looking at what we call trade restrictions, wherein, of course, some countries would have a due advantage and would utilize practices to lower the prices of their exports so that the accepting market would be flooded with cheaper agricultural commodities than what the locals can produce, and therefore causing the local agricultural sector to become poorer. So we can see that happening now, of course, as to lower the price of meat and rice, for example. Our government has opened up exports and lowered the tariff barriers and quotas so that our local market could be flooded with more foreign food at cheaper prices. While that affects, for example, the bottom line that the people are now able to afford these produce, the farmers stand to lose the most, local farmers rather. And sometimes this is achieved because exporting countries uh, have subsidies on their exports, which make it artificially cheaper and therefore able to compete and even overthrow the local producers in terms of pricing. So this should be corrected using appropriate trade solutions and laws and eliminating what we call the technical barriers to trade and ensuring fair trade. So moving on, it is not only zero hunger that we're after, but of course we know that food is also part of our good health and well-being. So we plan, or rather the Sustainable Development Goals also include plans to improve the quality of life for people, and one way to do that is through the metric maternal mortality ratio. So we want to reduce the number of deaths of the mother while giving birth to around 70 per 100,000 live births. So we know that giving birth is risky, especially if you are in a place where there is not enough medical facilities. And of course, uh, imagine if this number was high, then you'd have probably a good number of children growing up without a mother. And so we also plan to reduce the preventable deaths of newborns and children under 5, to reduce what we call this neonatal mortality rate to at least as low, so if not lower, as 12 per 1,000 live births, and the under 5 mortality to at least 25 per 1,000 live births. So there are still many places around the world, especially in rural areas, that have a very high rate of children dying either at birth or before they reach the age of 5, succumbing to diseases and some forms of malnutrition along the way. And this is sad because the key word here is those are preventable deaths. Okay, so we need to be able to prevent them, and food and nutrition plays a very large role in this. Yung health ng mother, yung health ng child, in the woman even growing up until reaching the age of 5. So, ganun kahalaga po yung role ng food scientists, technologists, and nutritionists in our global goals. Also included in the improvement of the quality of life is to end epidemics. We also might add now yung ating current pandemic. So epidemics like AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and neglected tropical diseases, waterborne diseases, and other communicable diseases. So as we know, these things kill people, okay, and that these could be addressed through various interventions. Some of them may include, for example, waterborne diseases. Obviously, food science also deals with having clean water and we can do a lot to combat foodborne and waterborne diseases as well. We also plan to reduce by one-third premature mortality from NCDs or non-communicable diseases through prevention and treatment and promotion of mental health and well-being. But we also know that these NCDs or non-communicable diseases are sometimes called lifestyle diseases, a big factor of which is the food we eat. Mga um, diabetes, etc., heart attack, these are killing people, no? Because of what they eat and the lack of knowledge on the proper nutrition, perhaps lack of self-control as well, and sadly, for the most part, the lack of affordable, healthy food. So that's one thing we could look at as food scientists and technologists. And lastly, we want to strengthen the prevention and treatment of substance abuse. Okay, we can't do much about drugs except give them food that as an alternative to drugs. But alcohol is also a food, and of course, there are food technologists employed in institutions that manufacture alcoholic beverages. So maybe we can look at how we could address these through policies and laws, and maybe um, looking at research on alcohol and how we can incorporate that into our product development. We also want to strengthen the capacity of countries, especially developing countries like ours, in terms of early warning, risk reduction, and management of national and global health risks. So we can see this now playing in how, for example, DOH handles the pandemic, and even before the pandemic, how they handled their various programs to combat the various diseases that we want to eliminate through things like vaccination drives for educating the people regarding how to change their lifestyles or eliminate maybe things that can cause diseases around them, like cleaning their environment, etc., and pouring their budget into the appropriate programs as well. So of note here is that we have a sustainable development goal specific to water and sanitation. So we know that around the world there are still places where safe drinking water is either not present or is present but is not affordable and is therefore a luxury to some. And we know that in certain areas, people die by drinking contaminated water because of the diseases that they could contract from it. So, to achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for all, and of course, particularly ending open defecation, which is still a practice in other areas, we need to pay special attention to the needs, especially of women and girls and those in vulnerable situations. So, at least dun sa part ng sanitation and clean water, ay may kinalaman tayo. In fact, for example, even in food manufacturing, we have the highest standards for sanitizing our workplaces, even higher standards than, let's say, a fast food kitchen. Right? Kasi yung ginagawa nating pagkain at tubig inumin ay pwedeng makahawa ng sakit sa iba, di ba? So we also want to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all through improving water quality by reducing pollution, eliminating and dumping minimal release of hazardous chemical materials, and having a proportion of untreated wastewater substantially increasing recycling and safe reuse globally. So water is a limited resource and we use it a lot, especially in food production. No, even for example, yung sa bahay nga lang, di ba, may mga hugas-hugasan, may mga pinamili mong prutas at gulay bago mo iluto, and then even after you cook, you use a lot of water to wash the things that you cooked with. So imagine doing this in a larger scale in a food manufacturing facility. And actually, for example, in our Philippine laws, pag may food manufacturing plant ka, kailangan mo ng wastewater treatment facility, no? And you have to be able to, for the sake of sustainability, reuse as much as possible yung mga tubig na ito. Like for example, yung let's say pinanghugas mo ng gulay, that can be collected automatically and be rerouted to, let's say, use in, let's say, flushing toilets and the like. Okay, or pandilig ng halaman. So you can even see some companies saying na, oh, itong wastewater namin, sobrang linis after matreat sa plant namin, pwede silang um, gamitin dito sa aming tilapia fish pond. Okay, may mga ganun silang initiatives. Okay, and we want to also substantially increase water use efficiency across all sectors. Marami nagsasabi na by 2025, for example, sa Metro Manila ay sobrang kukulangin na tayo ng tubig because of the rate the population is increasing, and of course, yung mga dams natin, di ba, kinukulang na, and we also have climate change causing an imbalance in the regularity of rainfall, among other things. Okay, so it's what you call the scarcity of fresh water, and you want to reduce that so that there will be less water cuts and water will be affordable for all. And sa food science, of course, we could probably develop technologies to minimize the use of water in operations as much as possible. Obviously, to be able to meet the sustainable development goal, we also need to invest in technologies and research for what we call capacity building, to be able to enact activities and programs that would increase the water supply and efficiency of current processes, probably change certain processes, and advocate for recycling and reuse technologies. Especially, for example, agriculture is a very big consumer of water, and in case you didn't know, rice is a very water hungry crop. So interventions, as I mentioned earlier, have been suggested, such as why not try to champion other staples that are less water hungry, like, let's say, kamote, right, instead of rice, because we use an inordinate amount of water to plant rice. Anyway, we also want to support and strengthen participation of local communities in improving water and sanitation management. So, syempre kung yung mga rural areas, meron silang mga small projects. So, community involvement goes a long way in supporting, no? Hindi lang yan yung relationship na parang, oh, kami yung water management, we bill you for the water you use, and that's it. So how do you get the people involved so that they will probably cooperate more and act like co-owners perhaps of these projects, to make sure that we become sustainable in the things that we do, whether it be farming or providing drinking water for a local community. Finally, let's look at responsible consumption and production. So I challenge you right now to look at the trash cans that you have in your homes, and probably try to calculate how much of the trash you're throwing is related to food, no? Like food packaging or food waste in the form of maybe yung mga pinagbalatan ng prutas ninyo, or yung mga ulam na hindi naubos, yung mga tira-tirang kanin. So obviously, napakalaki po ng impact ng food waste sa ating consumption and production volume, especially the stuff we throw away. Unless you're someone who orders from Shopee and Lazada and other delivery apps almost every day, chances are food is the single biggest contributor to your trash at home. Okay, so with that in mind, for responsible consumption and production, there is a 10-year framework that we want to implement of programs on sustainable consumption and production, and all countries need to take action, especially with developing countries who have the privilege of implementing more expensive interventions, for example. And of course, we want to be fair to the capability of countries, no? So, meron tayong tinatawag na sasabihin lang circular economy, wherein instead of just producing and throwing away, yung mga tinatapon mo are integrated back into the cycle. Like, may parang infinite loop sign dyan. Okay? So, Other ways to do this is to encourage the large companies, lalo na yung transnational, yung mga mas madalas mag-pollute, to adopt sustainable practices, which of course should have impact, and to integrate sustainability information into their reporting cycle. No? So, if you may have heard of the term greenwashing, ito yung parang sinasabi nila na mema lang yung mga companies na, uy, we're doing something sustainable, na when in fact the impact is either too small or in proportion to how much waste they're producing, their intervention is very negligible. But of course, some would say it's at least a start kasi hindi mo naman basta overnight ma-force yung mga multinational companies to change, but at least there should be that awareness and doing something proactively. Tapos kailangan may impact talaga ito in the reduction and eventual elimination of, let's say, practices that are not sustainable at all. So we also want to support developing countries to strengthen their scientific and technological capacity to move towards more sustainable patterns of consumption and production. Do you know that in certain parts of the Philippines, wala pa ring matinong mga trash collection systems? No, na parang, I've seen this in the provinces that the people still burn their garbage, even yung mga plastic like yung balat ng chichirya. Kasi walang garbage collection, walang dump site. Tapos kung meron namang mga dump site like here in Metro Manila where I live, dump site lang sila. There's not much effort into recycling except yung mga scavengers who try to pick off what they can resell. Pero aminado, yung food packaging ay isang napakalaking problema, no? Dahil tulad ng mga sachet ng shampoo na kumakalat sa ocean, you have all those issues with microplastics and the like. Certain types of food packaging are very hard to recycle. Typically, the more layers, the more types of material fused together, like yung mga chichirya mo, which is a combination of plastic and aluminum and metal and whatever. Hindi yun basta-bastang nare-recycle, no? Kasi pinagdikit mo halimbawa yung plastic at bakal, and how do you separate that? Even the Tetra Pak cartons, which are very much recyclable, would still need dedicated recycling facility, and without that facility, baliwala yung sinabi mong recyclable siya. And sadly, the Philippines doesn't have very advanced recycling options, no? Except maybe for yung mga metal and glass. Kaya tignan nyo pag yung Jaryo bote, very limited yung kinukolekta nila. In fact, sa Jaryo bote ngayon, marami na silang mga bagay na hindi binibili. Therefore, pwede natin sabihin na hindi na ganun ka nag-enter sa recycling stream yung mga materials na yun, and they just get thrown away. And we don't even, let's say, incinerate or try to recycle them talaga. So, yeah, a lot of work has to be done in this end. And in a way, food technologists are to blame since earlier, without enough information, we produced these things without regard for the environmental impact. So you could call it a side effect of capitalism or just ignorance about science. But this affects all levels of society, both the poor and the rich. Okay, so responsible consumption and production, of course, affects us individually as consumers, but also as future food technologists, as ones producing consumable items. So we want to achieve the sustainable management and use of natural resources. So sinasaklaw nito hindi lang pagkain, no? Kasi para sa lahat ng pati mga electronic devices, mga mining ng heavy metals mo, etc. But of course, you want to focus on food. So ito, we want to have the per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels, which you have seen in earlier slides, no, na napakataas, mga almost 50% in certain produce, and reduce food losses along food supply chains, including post-harvest ones. So you've seen the financial impact globally, no, halos trillions of dollars worth yung tinatapon nating pagkain and the resources used to grow them. So may intervention, of course, on the food technology side because food processing could substantially increase the shelf life of foods and make them available for consumption for a longer period of time. And we could also utilize certain logistical technologies para hindi napapanis along the way yung mga pagkain natin. Okay? So for example, sa supermarket, two of the most perishable things I know, tinapay at yogurt. Yung non-pasteurized type na yogurt. No? So, and malaki yung mga losses na to kasi usually ang shelf life nila 1 to 2 weeks lang. And you have to pull them out, put them on sale or whatnot. No, para lang mabilis yung turnover nila at walang nasasayang. Kung meron man nag-expire, minsan pwede mo pang gamitin to for other uses. Imbis na itapon mo, why not use it as fish food? Something like that. So some companies actually do that. No? You also want to substantially reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. No, yung eco bag, medyo maliit yung impact nun, pero that's a good way to start. No? And sadly, yung food packaging medyo isang malaking contributor ito dahil yung mga pre-packaged foods natin, to be able to keep their shelf life high, they really have to use those individually wrapped thingies. No? So, there should be ways to minimize this, or research should be conducted in terms of mas mga biodegradable na food production material, food packaging materials rather, okay, and how to integrate this and reuse them periodically, no? So a lot can be done sa food science and technology towards that end. So lastly, chemical waste and other waste generated through the life cycle should be in accordance with agreed international framework, and significant reductions should also be considered in release to air, water, and soil. And hindi naman siguro lingid sa ating kaalaman yung mga facts, no? Like, if you're a factory, whether you're producing food or non-food items, you usually have a waste outlet. So actually, we have the Laguna Lake Development Authority, which prohibits a lot of things, especially yung mga nagdadump sa river. And we have a lot of environmental standards in place para mabawasan yung bad stuff na pwedeng ma-release sa hangin at sa tubig in particular, no? And of course, we want to also minimize things that could also kill biodiversity. For example, even if you're just throwing sugar dissolved in water sa inyong waste, it could actually lower the dissolved oxygen content and therefore maybe kill off some sorts of life forms in ponds and rivers. No? So, may mga ganang bagay tayong tinitignan. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that lecture. Sana naging eye-opening ito para sa inyo and you were able to learn a lot of things, and hopefully that would spark your interest and your nationalistic heart to be part of the future roster of food scientists and technologists. So meron pa po itong part 3, which will be in another segment where we look at the facts and figures on food security and nutrition in the Philippines, and also, as I've been always talking about it, we'll be defining what food security means, no? Since itong definition po ng food security na ito ang basihan ng mga bagay na kailangan natin gawin, because if you say we want to meet food security, then we want to meet all aspects of that. No? So I hope you're ready for that, and thank you and have a nice day.